Good evening, good morning, wherever you are around the world. This is Chris Finolio with the blog of therange.com. So pleased to welcome Stephen Hunter with us here today. As you know, Stephen was the actor in the 3 Hobbit films. He was a very large presence in these films. As you know, he played the part of Bombur. So Stephen, welcome.
Thanks.
Sure do appreciate it.
Thank you. Hope you can hear me okay.
Yeah, just fine.
You can see the poster. That was a picture that we got on the final
painting?
day on the film. Yeah, it was a painting we all got given. So, and you might see the maps.
So nice.
Sort of on the other side you can't see, but I've got a nice photo of is the whole cast. I was on our very last day that they took it. You're probably familiar with.
You know, I saw both them handed in the appendixes of the DVDs and the Blu-rays. You know, the wonderful material there. They showed that presentation of all the paintings, and they did a still of that photo.
Yeah,
Everybody, and with Martin and with Peter Jackson. So what a great cast for that whole film.
Yeah, it was cool. It was very cool.
Well, and you know, like I said, Bombur had such a large presence on the screen. Literally, I mean, how long did it take you to get made up every morning on the days that you shot?
Look, it got quicker over time. It was initially probably about 2.5 hours to start with. That's just for prosthetics, and then then after that, we probably got it down to maybe an hour and a half. But I had 2 prosthetics artists with me, so you know that sort of made things a bit quicker because I had 5 pieces. I had my main face piece, and then there was the bald spot, and then there was the chin. And then we all went for breakfast, all of us, just with these bald heads. And then we got our hair on afterwards because it's pretty hard to eat with some of them. Peter Hamilton, who played Gloin, especially, he needed chopsticks sometimes to try and get his his hair apart so he could actually eat some lunch.
Oh my, yeah, hard to move around in all the costume and everything. Yeah. And so much you had, like you said, you had 5 different prosthetics on your face. So much of what you had to do acting-wise was all in your eyes, since that was really the only part of your face that was, actually yours. Was that hard to do, or? Yeah,
and it was hard outside, and I know Mark probably suffered the most. I remember one time because he'd worked with Peter so many times, so Peter used to sort of, rouse him a little bit, just friendly. But there was a time when we were outside and they changed the mix of the prosthetics because it was all silicon, because they were worried it was going to melt in the heat because we were shooting in summer in New Zealand, around the mountains, etc. And he wanted more expression, but the silicon was so thick, it's very hard to act through it. So you kind of almost have to, be a stage actor in a way. You have to just really overdo things to try and get through. And as he's right, with your eyes, I mean, that's what it's all about anyway with camera stuff. But sometimes we really had to, work it. Right.
Well, and I guess Peter gave you cues, specific instructions, try to, look in a particular way or, to make the scene work. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, a lot of it was, we'd have a lot of stuff going on, and he really couldn't see it, so. But that was just due to the prosthetics. So, but the thing with Pete, he'd act it out himself. He'd play it out and do all the noises, and you'd hear noises in the background because he had this tent, and we called it the voice of God. And it was, he had a microphone, and because a lot of times he was monitoring second unit at the same time. So, but yeah, it was fun. And then he'd come on set, of course, and he'd sort of try and act stuff out with us.
Yeah. Well, I imagine, running and doing all that physical stuff in that suit. It reminded me, Michael Keaton was on The Tonight Show once when he first appeared as Batman, and he said, you prepare, but eventually you just got to work the suit, what you're wearing on set and just, make it happen. So
yeah, totally.
Some of the same experiences with that big fat suit.
Yeah, well, mine was quite comfortable. It was like wearing a whole lot of duvets and, big blankets over you. Mine wasn't as heavy. Like, it was heavy in Lake Town. The arm was definitely heavy, and my arm started to go numb. But generally speaking, the clothes were quite light, unless they got wet. When they got wet, they were, they were crazy. I think my stunt guy, when we did the barrel scenes, actually on the Pelorus River, because there were so many different parts to that scene that was shot over several months. But my stuntman got out and weighed himself, and it was 185 kilos, which is, and I need 4 guys to lift me up, and I had to sort of walk up the hill for lunch. Thanks, guys.
Wow.
But generally speaking, it was pretty good. It looked really uncomfortable, but it was pretty snug.
Oh, that's great. Well, and so much of Bombur's action was heavy, kind of, comic relief. Do you have, when he was catching food in his mouth, or he's on the table and he falls and stuff like that? Did some of your previous work prepare you for that type of comedy action?
Yeah. Like I think I got into comedy from a young age. At school, I did a lot of school musicals and plays when I was, I guess, in first year in college, so in high school. So yeah, I'd always gone for comedy, and there was a few lines in there to start with, and then I got an email from Pete and Fran and Phil just saying, look, we've had quite a lot of a few lines in here for you, but they're thinking of taking those out and making me a non-speaking character, but creating a whole lot of physical gags. And I remember talking to my agent. She's like, well, you don't want to give up the lines, and I'm like, yeah, but should I? Is it worth fighting for like 4 or 5 lines of dialogue with 6 or 7 other guys, or I can make myself unique? And because the character himself was so big and I had the size, it was really just a lesson in not trying to do too much, because the character spoke for himself. And then it was, as you say, it's subtleties, and I just, from an acting perspective, I always have a point of view about what I'm doing, and I've always got a point of view about everybody, and I always make sure I'm doing something, and then I let the size take care of itself, and I just made sure that I was alive the whole time. So that's kind of where it went, and I ended up with some really good physical gags, which I think served me better and served the character better.
Yeah, most definitely. And again, welcome to everybody watching. We're talking with Stephen Hunter, who played Bombur in the Hobbit films. And we always ask an actor, what's a charity that he'd like to publicize? And Stephen's is the Actors Benevolent Fund of New South Wales. And Stephen, why is that important to you?
Well, obviously it's been a pretty crazy time within the world, and a lot of people have lost jobs and lost income. And in Australia, unfortunately, we're lumbered with a government who really doesn't care for the arts at all. In New Zealand, where I originally come from, they're supporting the arts in a big way. But in Australia, they've really been ignored. So recently, there was a few funds that basically paid employers to play their employees, and it's covered a lot of industries, and it's really helped people out. But the arts didn't qualify because you had to be employed for 12 months. And nowhere in the arts or performances does that happen. So there's a huge amount of performers, like crew as well, but also actors who do, especially live performers, where shows have been put off and they've got no way of recouping any of that money. So, it's always been important, the Benevolent Fund, and there's chapters all around Australia. And it's just, because we work in an industry where you can't guarantee where your work's going to come from, and it's a choice. And especially now, it's been taken out from under them. So yeah, that was the reason why, because a lot of my fellow actors are really doing it tough at the moment.
Well, that's great. And when we post this video on the blog of the Rings, that'll be a web page, and it'll have a hyperlink to that donate button. So thank you.
Great, yeah. And I'm also, there's a few things, like I do Cameo as well, and I think over the weekend all my Cameo was going through the NAACP empowerment program, and I've also got a Patreon page, Stephen Hunter on Patreon, and I over the summertime I donated a whole lot of money to the bushfires over here, and so through that Patreon page, if a need comes up, I'll usually sort of put some money to those charities as well.
Yep, great. Now, when I was watching the appendixes, I caught something, and I think this is accurate, but the scene where Bombur is blowing the horn right before Thorin's charge near the end of in the Battle of the Five Armies, and there was a great close-up, and they showed some behind the scenes. Peter, you were up there, and they had the big horn and everything. You balanced it and everything. And Peter said something about, do you need, what I thought he was talking about was fake tears. And you said, no, just on my acting. And so they showed that. And you did a wonderful performance. Not only did your eyes bulge because you were blowing that big horn, but the tears came. But that in the final film, they showed your eyes bulging, but they cut right before the tears came. What was it that he asked you to think about during that scene? Was it for the reason for the tears, I guess?
Oh, look, I knew what the setup. I mean, this was saving his mates, etc. And it was a really big moment, and after everything they'd been through, and Pete made, because sometimes it's easier. They just put little teardrops, put drops in people's eyes, and I'm like, well, I studied Meisner, and Meisner is all about, it's being truthful in imaginary circumstances. So being able to cry on cue, I can do. And I was probably a bit of a smart aleck. I'm going, no, I'll just use my acting, which is the words I use. But I was like, no, I've got this. And it felt more real to me to do that. It was funny because that horn thing, we actually attempted it the day before, and it was being held up by a wire, but it was slightly off balance. And I was a little bit out of whack, and it really was getting my back quite badly. Richard Taylor himself brought it up on set, and head of Weta, and he goes, "Look, sorry, Stephen, we haven't had time to do a lightweight version, so this is made of fiberglass," and it was quite heavy. But on the second day, I said, just take the wire off or slacken it off, and I'll take all the weight myself, and that's what I did in the end, because I found, even though it was heavy, it was easier to balance.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that could have been the other reason for the eyes bulging and the tears.
Oh, so very true. And also, I hope fans out there, a lot of them have seen, I hope most of them have seen the extended versions of this film, and especially the extended version of Battle of Five Armies. Bombur gets his, one line when he brings the axe, piece back to, his cousin, Bifer. So, what was that like? Or, did you do a special voice when you said that line, or was it just pretty natural?
Oh, we trained for like 6 or 7 weeks before we started filming, like doing accent. And our accent was Northern Irish because Jimmy Nesbitt was playing my brother Bofa. Yeah. That was his natural accent, and he doesn't really do accents, so he just does Jimmy. So, we had to sort of keep training, Hono, Bronco, which is like just to practice the Northern Irish. And it's more a country Northern Irish, not a real hard and fast Belfast like, Liam Neeson has played out a few times. But okay. So, and I only got that line at the lunch break on our very last day of pickups in 2013. I just didn't think I'd have a line, and I was quite happy not to have a line by that stage. And then they go, here's your line for this afternoon. I'm like, okay, here we go. So yeah, look, it was fun. It was good, and it just gives people something else to talk about. And the lines there in the extended edition, and there's a bit more of our fighting, because we spent days and days, doing fighting for that movie. And when the theatrical version came out, we were at the premiere in LA at the Dolby Theatre, and we were like, what? They cut away from us, and then we thought, they'll come back, and they never did. And we were like, oh, okay. Wonder what happened with that fighting, but it came back in the extended version, which I think that's Pete's version. I think that's the one that he really wanted.
That's the same way with Lord of the Rings too. I mean, you recommend it's 12 hours, but that's the definitive version of
totally
Peter Jackson's
yeah.
And you mentioned Jimmy Nesbitt. So in the story, you two are brothers, but as he was talking, it sounded like you struck up a kind of a brotherly relationship, off screen too. Is that? Yeah,
well, I'm younger than Jimmy, and not by a great stretch, but enough. And he's a very well-known actor, and I guess I was kind of in awe of Jimmy a bit, and probably followed him around. Jimmy, like myself, is quite social. He enjoys his wine. He enjoys his rugby. And being a Kiwi myself, I definitely enjoy rugby. So we did spend a lot of time together. And the Rugby World Cup was on in 2011 in New Zealand at the time, and we hadn't won it for 24 years. So Jimmy met the marketing manager for the Rugby World Cup, who was an Irishman as well. So and he said to me very early, he goes, "I'm taking you to the final." I said, "Okay, cool." And so we did, and we went to all these games, and we sort of hung out, and yeah, it was great. He was a lot of fun, and he's a country boy, like me. So yeah, we got on really well.
And did you see the All Blacks play?
Oh, we saw the All Blacks play many times. You know, I always saw and you know, my dad passed away. He got to see the premiere of The Desolation of Smile, but he didn't get to see the Battle of Five Armies. Probably just as well. but you know, I took him to see one of the games in the Rugby World Cup, and I remember one of the last great experiences he had was we were watching rugby at Ian McKellen's place, the Syrians, and there was a rugby test match, and there was like, you know, 5 or 6 guys, and we were in his bedroom because there was a dinner party going on, and we were in there watching rugby. And I'll never forget it because my dad had the best time, and he got to meet one of his idols, Billy Connolly, and he goes, "Do you think he'd mind having a chat?" I said, "No." And Billy sat there and, you know, stood there, and he had this big old chat with my mum and dad, and yeah, it was pretty amazing. I'll never forget that. He's a pretty special guy. Yeah.
So, and you said you're from New Zealand, but you live in Sydney right now. Did you live in Sydney during the filming?
No. Yes, I did. I moved to Sydney in 2003 from New Zealand, and yeah, like 2010. Well, it's actually before then, probably the year before. My mum and dad were in Sydney visiting, and I was like, you know, I heard about The Hobbit being filmed, so I reconnected with my New Zealand agent, and I said, look, I really want to do this, you know, and I want to go through you because I think I've got a better chance of getting in through New Zealand. So that's how it started. So I actually flew to New Zealand from Sydney to do my audition in Auckland. I didn't tell them I was based in Sydney. My agent didn't tell them I was based in Sydney because I wanted to get in front of the casting directors because they hadn't seen me before, and I thought it was a good move. So, yeah. But yeah, I've been in Sydney now for like 17 years.
Sure. And when, you know, it took 2.5 years to film the 3 Hobbit movies, did you like move back to New Zealand for the whole time, or did you go back and forth during certain breaks? Or
oh, look, we because of Martin Freeman's schedule, because Martin turned down The Hobbit to start with because he was committed to doing Sherlock, and then Pete changed the whole schedule of the film, and we shot in 3 blocks, and we had 2 hiatus periods. So over that time, we came back to Sydney and just had a short-term rental. But in Wellington, they gave us a house for the whole time.
Oh wow!
Yeah, they were amazing. You know, they really looked after us exceptionally well. So we had everything we needed over there, and then we'd come back to Sydney for a few weeks, you know, and see all the family and go and see everybody, and then get back into crazy movie world again.
No, yes, absolutely. So, so I had this thought, you know, even though Bombur had the one line, you know, by and large, he wasn't supposed. So imagine Bombur was stuck at home for like 9 weeks because of the coronavirus, and he'd really developed, you know, some really good recipes, you know, since he's the cook and everything. What would Bombur tell us? What Bombur would say, you know, would be his favorite dinner to enjoy at night?
Well, I guess it depends on the season, and you know, and I do cook a lot. I cook. You know, we actually had a street scone baking competition last weekend, which I won. So I'm now the purveyor of award-winning scones on our street. I cook like a casserole. I'm a big fan of Anthony Bourdain, and I basically use his beef bourguignon recipe. So I think Bombur would be cooking like a big casserole, a big stew, something warm and something hearty, and lots of it. I'm sure, because he'd want 2 or 3 helpings himself. Yeah, it's interesting because with all the characters, there's so much of each actor's personality in all these characters. You know, myself, where you look at Mark Hadlow, who's a bit of a nana, you know, he's, you know, everyone's like that. I love Mark, and you know, there's so much of us in these characters, and we got to do that. We got to add more to it as well.
So tell me, just describe. I'm going to just jot out a few words, and I don't need a one-word answer, but just, you know, describe a little bit of what you think about. And I've asked this of other actors before, and to fans that, you know, have watched The Appendices, you know, scene 88 was that scene where you guys are out running forever to escape the wards and the orcs before you found the path to Rivendell. So what comes to mind when you hear the word scene 88? Just
exhaustion and heat. I've got a singlet. I've got a running singlet in my cupboard, which says the scene 88 marathon. And because a few of them, like most of the time, they were stunt guys. But I remember there was myself, Jed Brophy, because Jed can handle anything, and William Kircher, and we were running with the stunt guys, and then all the other boys were off having coffees or doing whatever they were doing. But it just went on, and that was the gag. The Senior 88 just went forever. There must have been weeks shooting that. And part of me thinks, did he get it all? Did he just want to just put us through that a little bit more? He has that sort of sadistic streak to him, Pete.
Yeah.
in a lovely way, but yeah.
Right. So when you think of Weta Workshop, what comes to mind?
Genius. The guys are Weta, and they're the best in the world, and it's one of my favourite places in the world, aside from Park Road Post because I'm a Soundie. But just magical, that whole place. There's
the memorable scene with the trolls where you guys were all in a dwarf kebab, just turning on a spit. What was that like?
I was actually I was in the sack. I was in the sack on the ground, so I was tied up. Well, the other boys, I remember that because a lot of the time was the stunt guys, and there used to be this YouTube clip about this like prairie dog or like squirrel just going, was it Kevin, Dave, like that. And there was a guy called Dave, and that they used to just say that the whole time. I got covered in troll snot at that because I got thrown across the room and I got all that stuff put on me for a full day or 2 days, and never even made the movie.
Oh yeah, you were the one that Bilbo said had worms in the bag.
Yes.
So when you hear the name Peter Jackson, Sir Peter Jackson, what do you think?
Again, the word genius. I think him and Richard Taylor, two peas in the pod. I mean, just relentless too. Like they work so hard, those two together, and they expect hard work from all their crew. But I don't think anyone works as hard as either of them. But Peter's a genius, and he's got everything in his head. I mean, he said it himself. No one could have pulled off that movie with all the obstacles and the late start and him taking over, and no one could have pulled it off. Dan Henner, who's just an amazing production designer, basically said that it was like laying tracks as the train was coming, and that's how they did that movie. So, I know he's not really. He's doing some other things at the moment. I think there's a Beatles documentary or something coming up, and obviously that amazing World War I movie. But yeah, he's just a genius. And it's not, ask him about planes and about the wars, and that's where he really gets lit up as well.
Right, he knows a lot about Sir Edmund Hillary and things like that. So yeah, tons of knowledge. So I didn't ask you directly, but what was your favorite scene of all three movies that you were part of?
Oh, look, they vary for different reasons. I mean, I love the running from Bayon's because that was a moment that I really got to myself, and that. And no one tells you, like, on 3 days you're going to be doing this big run. You just read the script and you have to prepare. And we went for big walks, and we'd obviously done a lot of physical training. And I turned up on the day and I had my big dwarf boots on, and I quickly said to the wardrobe team, look, have you got my runners? Can you please go get them? And I found out that they weren't going to see my feet. And so I did my runners, and then we were just lining up. And Pete's like, okay, so you guys are, you got to go pretty fast here because you're running from the bear, and he'll probably eat you. So it's life and death. So, and he goes, don't pretend to run fast. You need to run fast because otherwise it'll look silly if you're trying to slow yourself down. So go as fast as you can. And Stephen, you just go faster. Action. and that was it. And we had 3 takes of it, and it worked really well. The barrels were fun. We did the barrels in the Pelorus River, which is such a crazy day. It was so much fun. Then we did like weeks of barrels in this big, like a go-kart track with 2 V8 engines either side, just propelling us around. There was even guys in shopping trolleys pretending to be in barrels, and so that was a cool scene. And I can't forget the very first one we did, which was Bag End, and we were sitting in the Bag End. I was sitting next to Adam Brown, as a matter of fact, and just saying, this is just surreal what we're doing at the very start of it. And did they make a mistake? Because there was more than one Adam Brown on IMDb. There's more than one Stephen Hunter. And we're like, have they picked the wrong guy? And then Ian walked out dressed as Gandalf, and like, okay, it's about to get real.
Yeah, most definitely. Well, you've been so great talking with us for such a long time. I do want to ask you about any projects you've got coming up. your I guess Escape from Pretoria with Daniel Radcliffe is coming out soon. Or
yeah, well, I'm not too sure the release dates worldwide, but I know it's been released in a few places. It was released on digital a couple of weeks ago in Australia, and it's done very well. I get to play his father, and that's a South African movie. So that was really good. I'm basically the very start of the movie, and then a lot of it's about being about the prison. But I did another movie called Two Heads Creek, which is a sort of schlocky, a cross between The Castle, which is this very famous, very, very Australian movie, and something like Shaun of the Dead, that is done very well. And also just wrapped on a movie called Children of the Corn, which is a remake of Stephen King's novel, and it's all up on IMDb. And that was one of two movies that actually managed to keep filming, or start and continue and finish filming during the whole COVID period, which was a miracle. But they followed all the protocols, and that was an amazing experience. So that'll be out next year, I imagine. And we've got a few TV shows that are about to restart, and I've got another movie that was put off that'll restart shortly. So in the meantime, I'm doing lots of this kind of stuff. I do voiceovers. This is actually my voice booth. I'll just give you that's my little voiceover studio, nice. which is in my office. And I do this, and also do audiobooks. So I'm currently reading an audiobook at the moment. So and I guess the other thing I do a few podcasts. I've got one called Yeah Nah Sweet, which is myself and a New Zealand mate, and we're just talking about events of the day. And I've got my podcasts of actors talk about themselves, which I've interviewed all my Hobbit mates, and they're available on my Patreon page. And I do an exclusive one for some of my VIP room patrons called There Was This One Time in Dwarf Camp, which is essentially like a Q&A, and they send in questions, and I do those sort of once a month as well. So yeah, I'm trying to keep busy.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I need to dial into some of those. Those are great.
Yeah.
Well, Stephen, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And fans, look for this interview on the blogoftherange.com coming soon. And there's other articles there that you'll enjoy. Stephen, thanks again, and hope to see you again in the future.
No problem. My
Take
pleasure.
care.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Yep. Cheers.